Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment of the program brought to you by El Chico. You see it right there, Cedar Lane. That's just off the Merchant Road exit. If you want Knoxville's best Tex-Mex food, and they've been doing it for 30-plus years now, head to El Chico. Dining room, patio, or to-go dining. And right now, if you do their to-go dining, they even have their signature alcoholic beverages you can take with you back to your house. El Chico, the best Tex-Mex in East Tennessee since way back when I was in college, the late 80s. El Chico. Okay, worst case scenarios here. You've got 330 million Americans, thereabout, 328 million or something. You've had 160,000 Americans die of this so far. I know it's not a perfect comparison because that's over 8 months. At the same time, it's worse in African Americans than it is white, so you got more African American ball players. They're going to be pushed together for a period of time. Bottom line is, if you take that percentage, 160,000 out of 330 million, that would suggest that out of 6,500 Power 5 football players, you'd lose 3 of them to COVID. Now, again, you'd have some people in the media, like Clay Travis, would write that you've got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Most of us, however, would look at that and say, the cost was way too high to play this football season. My question to you guys is, what happens worst case scenario? And if you want to put a less grim face on it, then let's say some kid gets really, really sick and winds up in the hospital for a really long time. Does everybody shut down as soon as there is one case? Or does it take 2 cases, 3 cases? Do they ever shut down? What happens worst case scenario?
I think they would shut down. Yeah, and I think it would be swift and it would be everybody at once. We talk about, okay, Big Ten, Pac-12, that probably leads the way. Then what would the other conferences do? I think there'd be a phone call and they'd all be on it together and they would all agree pretty quickly we're shutting down. If worst case hits, like you're talking about.
Everybody agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think, too, like, you know, we were talking before, I think it's worth noting, like, there's all this idea that, like, people are pushing fear. It's like,
right.
No, like, these are things that can happen that are worth discussing. What happens if this happens? Because to deny that that's a reality that could happen is just a head-in-the-sand approach that is not helpful to anyone. But I think you're right. I think that, you know, one player dying, I think, shuts the whole operation down. And I think what you're seeing is people sort of dancing on a tightrope and saying, like, well, I hope none of this stuff happens, and maybe they're going to try it, and maybe only 1 or 2 guys get in the ICU, and eventually they're fine. I think that's kind of where a lot of people are at. But, yeah, one player dies, the whole thing is done pretty much with the snap of a finger.
And then you've also got coaches, staff members who are part of this, too, who
that's
are
an interesting
some
question,
cases
too.
older, and we don't know about anybody's underlying conditions with this. And that's the thing. You go back to a Boston Celtic like Reggie Lewis, who just drops dead on a basketball court. Didn't know he had a heart condition, you know, until getting out there and playing, and this happened. A lot of athletes don't know they've got a problem until it's exposed. So this is a possibility. The question is, at that point, how big is the rebound? I think if this happens to a school, you talk about setting your program back years, because true or not, it will look like you forced a kid out there.
Yep.
And it will be, that's a program killer in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it'd be a tough to go. And like I said, I don't put it below people being called to account on Congressional Hill or being in front of some pretty serious allegations and other things. And I think then also you say, okay, who pays what? Who pays for the athlete in the ICU? His parents? Who pays if he passes away? What are you going to incentivize? What if there's long-term damage to their heart, their condition that is going to last for the next 30, 20 years? What's that going to look like? And when they come to that, you just go, okay, you know, if you're willing to play this season for money, be prepared to pay out money. And that's what you're going to have to look at if you're doing this season, come hell or high water. Be ready to pay the cost.
Not to mention lawsuits from any family if something happens to a son.
Yep.
Whether, even if they said we're good with him playing,
Yep.
you know, there could still be a lawsuit coming back to you. We know that about this litigious society.
One of the players' letters this week was that the Big Ten said, get rid of those waivers. Don't make us sign those waivers.
Yeah, the NCAA has been behind that too, which schools have been like dancing around. Tennessee had players sign them. We reported that.
Tennessee
had players sign them, and it's like it's not a legal document. A lot of other schools are doing it, but they're saying you can't do this. The NCAA is saying you can't do this. And when the NCAA does nothing, and they're saying that's telling.
Yep.
Bryant Gumbel's HBO Real Sports called out Tennessee specifically in one of their reports. When Ohio State did it, Missouri did, there were some other schools that had done it, but Tennessee was the one that they asked Greg Sankey about, and he said, I've been in touch with their chancellor. We're sure that's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder where this thing goes if worst case scenario happens. Now, just to be clear, and I think everyone here agrees with me, I hope there is college football.
Oh, yeah.
I'm for it. But that doesn't mean I necessarily think it's smart. And that I feel weaselly about that. But I hope they play it. I hope it's safe. I hope no one gets this thing. But I think my hopes are going to be dashed. So.
Yeah, I hope it happens, very much so. I think they have realized they haven't done a good enough job, conference level, NCAA, of coming up with testing guidelines. When they arrived on campus in June, talking about the student athletes, I think part of it was, hey, hope the next couple months go well. And then they didn't, and then they got to July and decided, you know what, we need to do a better job of preparing. And then there's a real time crunch. And now you still have players saying, you haven't done a good enough job. That was on the conference call. That's in the letter saying we need better testing plans, and you don't have a lot of time to come up with that. That's part of the issue.
All right, when we come back, let's get back to the on-field stuff. If you're Arkansas, Missouri, or Tennessee, and you have a bad year this year because you got to, let's say Tennessee loses to the two teams they put on there, Auburn and A&M, and it turns your season upside down. Would it still be worth it if Alabama and Georgia both make the playoff and you get a lot of extra money? We'll discuss that. Come on back on the Sports Source.